BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Wednesdays this year, I've been talking to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved mystery. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about Jack the Ripper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Jack the Ripper was a serial killer that operated in England in 1888. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And I have to give a shout out to longtime BBOR follower River Prawn Pottery, who sent me an article about the DNA in the Jack the Ripper case. And the motivation for today's episode is twofold. One of them is that one of you guys in the audience sent me something to respond to, but a bigger reason is I've been meaning to make this episode for quite some time now. And to all of you listeners on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, I will try my best to make this an audio presentation as much as a visual presentation. You can always get the YouTube version for free anywhere you have access to YouTube. Sorry, people who are behind the Great Firewall of China, but other BBOR listeners will get to see some visuals in this episode too. But as far as the DNA goes, has the Jack the Ripper mystery been solved? Has Jack the Ripper been identified? This is a story that really goes back to 2014, and even when I was a casual true crime follower who wasn't even under the surface of Jack the Ripper, I got the international news that there was going to be some type of DNA breakthrough, or at the very least, let's be clear, there was a book coming out called Naming Jack the Ripper by Russell Edwards that was going to talk about a DNA revelation in the case that was going to point toward a Jack the Ripper suspect named Aaron Kosminski. And some people believe that, to this day, wholeheartedly, that this DNA evidence is indeed correct, and there was a DNA link between some evidence in the Ripper case and Aaron Kosminski. And another even additional motivation for this episode is, about a month ago, there was a video made on the House of Lechmere channel that was presented by Edward Stowe, and he did an absolutely excellent job talking about the DNA in the Jack the Ripper case, and I'm going to play a clip from his channel, House of Lechmere, in just a second, and if anybody would like to reference the video, I encourage you to watch his video on the Jack the Ripper DNA. I'm going to play the clip that's about 5 minutes long. It's an introductory thing, and I'm purely doing this out of praise and admiration, and I think he did such a great job telling the story of the item in question, which is a shawl, for lack of a better term, that allegedly was owned by one of the victims in the Jack the Ripper case named Catherine Eddowes, who was killed by the Ripper on September 30th of 1888. So I'm going to play the clip from House of Lechmere, and then let's respond.
All over the media about how the Jack the Ripper case has been solved using DNA evidence. The purpose of this film is quite simple. It's to investigate the evidence to see if there's any truth behind these claims. I will also tell the story of how this whole business impacted the world of Ripperology. I will start by saying the history of the item from which samples were taken, which were later tested for DNA. The item concerned is most commonly described as a shawl. This has been doubted. It may in fact have been a table runner, a length of material that is laid out on a long table for decorative effect. Whether it was intended as a shawl or as a table runner and used as a shawl is of little importance. For convenience, I will describe it as a shawl. It was made of silk with tassels at one end and had a floral design dyed on most of one of the surfaces. The shawl is damaged and has been cut into two parts. There is heavy staining on it and smaller chunks have been cut out altogether. This is the supposed chain of ownership. Allegedly, the shawl was acquired by Acting Sergeant Amos Simpson, who obtained it in the course of his duties with the Metropolitan Police in 1888. Before he died in 1917, he gave it to his sister Mary Simpson, later Smith, who died around 1926. It then passed to her daughter, Eliza Smith, later Mills, who died in 1966, and then to her daughter, Eliza Mills, later Hayes, who died in 1997. She gave it to her son, David Melville Hayes, in 1986. In 1988, coincidentally, the 100th anniversary of the Jack the Ripper murders, a factor which itself invites suspicion, a Jack the Ripper researcher called Paul Harrison heard about a shawl that might be related to the case. In 1989, Harrison followed this up. He found that the shawl had been lent to an antiques dealer in Clacton-on-Sea in Essex, but had since been returned to David Melville Hayes, who also worked in the antiques business, specialising in hand-coloured prints. Another factor that invites suspicion. The Clacton antiques dealer had been allowed to keep two small pieces that were cut from the shawl and which were mounted in a frame. An antiques dealer cutting up a shawl which is supposedly an original Jack the Ripper artefact is yet another odd aspect of this story. According to David Melville Hayes, his great-great-uncle, Acting Sergeant Amos Simpson, had been on special duties relating to Fenian terrorism near Mitre Square, where the body of Catherine Eddowes was discovered. He accompanied the body to the mortuary and was allowed to take the shawl, which was covered in blood, as some sort of souvenir by a more senior officer. He thought his wife might want to use it for dressmaking, but she didn't. Nevertheless, Amos Simpson kept it, and it was supposedly passed on through various branches of his family along with this story. In 1991, David Melville Hayes approached the Scotland Yard Crime Museum, popularly known as the Black Museum, and lent them the shawl. Meanwhile, two ripperologists, Andy and Sue Parler, who lived in Clacton, heard about the shawl and managed to track down and buy the two small frame pieces that I referred to earlier. Soon afterwards, by chance, they bumped into David Melville Hayes at an antiques fair and learnt that the bulk of the shawl was at the Black Museum. In 1997, the Parlers were given special access to the Black Museum, which isn't open to normal members of the public, and found that the shawl was not on display, but was kept out of sight as its provenance was unclear. At that, David Melville Hayes wanted it back, and the Parlers had the task of retrieving it, although amazingly, the Black Museum cut out another small segment for their own keeping. It's quite amazing how unprofessional all these people were. As the Parlers had shown such an interest, David Melville Hayes allowed them to keep it on an extended loan, and they showed it at various events. For example, it made an appearance at Jack the Ripper conference held in Bournemouth in 2001. Reportedly, virtually every single attendee handled the shawl, obviously contaminating it with their own DNA. In 2006, the shawl briefly featured in a TV documentary, and swabs were taken from some possible bloodstains to test for DNA, but the outcome was inconclusive. After this, David Melville Hayes decided to sell the shawl, and a man called Russell Edwards bought it for an undisclosed sum following an auction in 2007. Russell Edwards later said that he had a predetermined belief that it was genuine.
And one more time, that was from the House of Lechmere channel, and the full title of the video is, Has DNA Evidence Solved the Jack the Ripper Case? And again, I encourage anyone to go over there and watch it in its entirety. It's over an hour long, but it's definitely going to get really, really deep into the world of not only the Jack the Ripper DNA, but also a bunch of other stories about ripperology from the past 20 years. So I give credit to Edward Stowe for making that video, and I'll be discussing some things that he mentioned in his video presentation near the end of this episode, but I want us to focus on the DNA evidence that could be traced back to the shawl that was from Catherine Eddowes discussed in this segment that you just heard. And I also want to share some things that prior to reading a true crime book, I often look at the free sample that's available from Kindle, if there is one, and Russell Edwards has his book Naming Jack the Ripper available in Kindle version. And I read through the free sample, and he also tells the story of how he was planning to buy the shawl at auction, and he was thinking £150,000. He would even spend that amount on it. There was no limit to what he was going to spend on the shawl. And at the end of the segment that I just played from Edward Stowe, he even talks about there's preconceived belief that there is this type of DNA on the shawl that was owned by Jack the Ripper. So Russell Edwards seems like he just had no end in sight to what he would pay to obtain this particular shawl, because he thought it actually did contain Jack the Ripper's DNA. But I also want to reinforce a point, and that is that this news story comes up time and time again. Ever since I saw the headlines back in 2014 about the book coming out, and you can even see Edward Stowe in the thumbnail of his own video holding the book naming Jack the Ripper. Ever since that came out, over the years, we will see some type of resurgence of some story saying that there is this DNA breakthrough in the Jack the Ripper case. This has been going on for nearly 11 years now, and this has just had some type of resurfacing in the news recently. And one of the news articles that was sent to me was from The Telegraph, but I would actually like to look at a different article that was discussing this from CBS News called Jack the Ripper's Victim's Relative Demands New Inquest After Possible DNA Breakthrough. And one more time from CBS News, just citing the source. Let's have a read. A descendant of one of Jack the Ripper's victims has demanded a new inquest into one of history's most notorious serial killers after DNA evidence suggested the murderer was a Polish barber. And of course we know that the Polish barber in question was Aaron Kosminski. The true identity of Jack the Ripper, whose grisly murders terrorized the murky slums of Whitechapel in London in 1888, has been a mystery ever since. There have been dozens of suspects from royalty and prime ministers down to bootmakers. And that's also very clear. And I just want to point out that this is something that I just have to come back to over and over again. Aaron Kosminski might be the prime suspect in the Jack the Ripper case. He might be the most widely discussed Jack the Ripper suspect. He might be thought of by the majority of people who follow the case to be Jack the Ripper, like the most highly thought of suspect and the most likely contender in the minds of many to be the one and only Whitechapel fiend. But Aaron Kosminski was not a prime minister, he was not a member of the royal family, he was not a nobleman, he was a barber, as you heard from the beginning. Sometimes he was referred to as a hairstylist, sometimes he's referred to as a hairdresser who had some minor understandings of surgery, but for a lot of his time in England, it's also reported that he was unemployed and he was not working in that profession. So this just goes to show that there aren't a bunch of wild conspiracy theories all the time. Just blaming some type of deranged, mentally ill man who had some type of training in the barber profession is hardly a wild conspiracy. But let's talk about the DNA that could convict Kosminski. After extracting DNA from a shawl recovered from the scene of one of the killings, Jack the Ripper sleuth Russell Edwards claimed in his 2014 book Naming Jack the Ripper that the murderer was Aaron Kosminski, an immigrant from Poland who worked as a barber. The story goes that the shawl came from the murder scene of the Ripper's fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes, on September 30th of 1888. At Edwards' request, Dr. Yari Luhelian, a senior lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University, isolated several small segments of DNA from bloodstains on the shawl. They were matched with the DNA of Karen Miller, a direct descendant of Catherine Eddowes, confirming her blood was on the shawl. On the testing, the first results showed a 99.2% match. Since the DNA has two complementary strands, we went on and retested the other DNA strand, which was a perfect 100% match, the doctor told the Liverpool Echo News. DNA from semen stains on the garment was matched with a descendant of Aaron Kosminski. Now, wait a second. Now, Aaron Kosminski did have descendants, and Aaron Kosminski, as I understand, also had other relatives in the United Kingdom at the time. He had other relatives in England, even though he was from Poland. So his family went on to procreate, and he had descendants. But when they talk about this DNA match, is that just it? Is that just game over? Is that just some type of revelation? Well, let's see. Edwards has demanded an inquest into the unsolved killing, saying the DNA warrants it. Well, absolutely, I think the DNA warrants this, because Aaron Kosminski is a suspect that goes all the way back to 1888. Absolutely investigate Aaron Kosminski, and even though I'm going to be saying some critical things about his candidacy for being Jack the Ripper, absolutely investigate him. I think he's a strong suspect, even though we're going to hear some more stuff about the DNA. The name Jack the Ripper has become sensationalized. It has gone down in history as this famous character, the relative of Catherine Eddowes told the paper. People have forgotten about the victims who did not have justice at the time. Now we need an inquest to legally name the killer. And I think absolutely everybody wants to know the truth, no matter whom they are. And this is a point that I wanted to discuss at the end, but I'll just say it right now. In Edward Stowe's video on the House of Lechmere channel, he was talking about how some people were accused of wanting the Jack the Ripper mystery to remain unsolved so they could profit from it, particularly tour guides and tour groups who build their businesses on running Jack the Ripper tours. And they were thinking that, oh, if the case has been solved, then no one will want to do Jack the Ripper tours anymore, and it will have an impact on this very, very select and niche aspect of tourism. And my simple response to this is that, number one, I'm sure that any Jack the Ripper tour guide probably wants to know the truth at some point. And secondarily, tour guides do not control law enforcement. Tour guides, tour groups, and tour companies do not control the courses of action that are related to a murder investigation. They don't control Scotland Yard. They don't control investigations. They do not have power over these entities. I mean, does a tour guide have those types of powers? I mean, I'm just asking you that as a challenge question. How much influence does the owner of a tour company even have over, let's say, forensic laboratories, manipulating evidence, silencing the police? How on earth would that even possibly take place? And I've dealt with this so much in the Zodiac Killer mystery, and the fact of the matter is that people who are running websites and people who are making YouTube videos and people who are, let's say, even tour guides, throw them in there. Jack the Ripper might have more tour guides than the Zodiac Killer case, but they don't control the outcomes and they don't control the investigations and they don't control what scientists have to say on a matter such as the DNA. So it's just ridiculous to try and say that they don't want the case solved. But let's hear some more things about Aaron Kosminski. Aaron Kosminski's descendants have also supported the inquest, which, as I said, I think everybody wants the truth in the Jack the Ripper case. And I know that if you've listened this far into the episode, you also want to know the truth about Jack the Ripper. According to the newspaper, Kosminski's great-great-great-niece, Amanda Polo, said, "I'm more than happy to establish what really happened." So I think that this just goes to show you that, do they have the Ripper's DNA? Everything that you have just heard in that CBS News article can be encapsulated within a single sentence. They're still working on it. Are they 100% sure that the DNA from the semen stains on the shawl? Now, we're not talking about Catherine Eddowes, but from the semen stains from the male is from Aaron Kosminski, and that he attacked her, that he attacked Catherine Eddowes? Doesn't sound like it. It sounds like this is something they're still trying to prove. In fact, CBS News even reported that this is not an established fact. The fact that they're even calling for a bigger inquest indicates that this is not an established fact, that Jack the Ripper has been identified and his name is Aaron Kosminski. But I also want to go over to a different post that was written on Texas State's website. This is news.texasstate.edu, and Texas State is actually spelled txst.edu, just citing the source once again. And Texas State has really been, very forthcoming when it comes to sharing Jack the Ripper resources. I referenced this university website when I did the episode on the psychological profile of Jack the Ripper, which you can hear, and I did a direct response to that here on Black Box Online Radio for Ripper Wednesday. Lots of Jack the Ripper content that you can hear on this channel, and I invite you to go through some of the playlists. But first, I would like to look at the article that was written back in 2019, Jack the Ripper, a wrongful conviction based on flawed DNA analysis. All right, so as I said once, and I'm going to say it again, over the past 11 years at the time of this recording, this news story comes up. Yeah, there's some type of a DNA breakthrough in the Jack the Ripper case. Well, other people are trying to just put the spotlight on the fact that the results are very murky, they are uncertain, and it is not a certifiable fact that there has been a DNA link between the unidentified Jack the Ripper and Aaron Kosminski, the 23-year-old Polish barber. And I think that kind of ultimately gets me to my stance on this issue. And I'm going to read this article from Texas State, but I guess I've given away my honest take on the subject. Ever since I started Ripper Wednesday, I was very early on exposed to Russell Edwards' book once again because I recognized the name from the news. And I was just like, well, this is Ripper Wednesday. I want to investigate the Ripper case. This is one of the first things I'm thinking about, right? The news stories about how they have the DNA link. And what I said was, if they truly, truly had evidence of this caliber, then there wouldn't even be a Jack the Ripper mystery anymore. That means that I have to just question the DNA. But let's read this article from Texas State, and let's look at this thing. Again, I think that this is a very good thing for them to share. Research published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences claiming to identify the notorious 19th century murderer Jack the Ripper through DNA analysis has grabbed headlines around the world in the spring of 2019. Well, guess what? Also in the winter of 2025. This is just something that's going to be happening from time and time again. And my motivation for talking to you about it in this manner and fashion is to just recognize that sometimes these media firestorms exist. And it's not because they actually have news. It's because they are building up a bunch of smoke to try and push a story and a narrative once again. Or maybe some of the flames actually catch and people get curious about the Ripper case. But I think all of you listening to this want the hard evidence. Back to the article. Careful analysis by Kim Rosmo, a research professor in the School of Criminal Justice at Texas State University, questioned the inquisitive logic of the study and concludes that it was a forensic failure. Well, of course he did, because Kim Rosmo literally wrote the book on criminal investigative failures, and I reference his stuff all the time in the Zodiac Killer Mystery. I show his book cover all the time here on Black Box Online Radio, and let's just continue here. Kim Rosmo recently completed a major research paper on the systematic causes of the wrongful convictions funded by the National Institute of Justice and noticed many of the same problems in the Ripper paper. The underlying errors in reasoning and logic here are tunnel vision, suspect-based focus, confirmation bias, uncritical acceptance of assumptions, unreported error rates, and probability mistakes. These are the same ones that are commonly found in wrongful convictions and other criminal investigative failures. Kim Rosmo is a retired Canadian police detective and inspector, and has long been a student of the Jack the Ripper case. He previously explained it from the perspective of a geographic profiler determining mathematical modeling, and I'm actually going to skip over the geographic profiling stuff, but that really is the forte of Kim Rosmo. If you ever do listen to his lectures online or watch some of the videos where he's featured in, yes, he is an expert on geographic profiling, and that stuff gets very, very advanced. But this is the stuff that I truly wanted to talk to you about for this episode of Ripper Wednesday. The problems Kim Rosmo identifies in Jack the Ripper's DNA research include: the DNA samples were recovered from a shawl purportedly found at the murder scene of Jack the Ripper's fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes. However, the shawl is not referenced in any investigation reports from the era, and the researchers failed to establish its provenance. Okay, and this is one thing that I'm trying to tie it back to, because I'm like, this is just thing that even if the shawl did belong to Catherine Eddowes, how do we know truly that this male DNA was from Jack the Ripper? So let's hear about that. The stains on the shawl are identified as the blood of the victim and semen from the killer, although neither claim is scientifically established by researchers, and there is no evidence of sexual activity associated with any of the Jack the Ripper murders. I talk about this all the time on Ripper Wednesday because Jack the Ripper was not a rapist. Now, even if people think that Jack the Ripper experienced some type of sexual arousal from mutilating the women, because Jack the Ripper wasn't only a serial killer, he didn't only murder the women, he also mutilated their bodies, and some people think that Jack the Ripper was aroused by that, but as far as committing some type of sex crime, I'm really noticing that the shawl and the semen stain that is found on the shawl are just one of the things that people really seem to zone in on. And also, I do want to be, completely fair and honest and say that even if we dispute Hallie Rubenhold's findings and say that Catherine Eddowes was working as a prostitute, she may have had the semen stain from another man, just saying. But also, this is the most important point, and I think that a lot of you who are still listening to this episode will want to hear this here. Mitochondrial DNA testing is used to identify Aaron Kosminski as the killer, Although this type of genetic marker, which can only be passed on through maternal lineage, is not a unique identifier. While mtDNA can be used to eliminate suspects, it cannot be used to implicate them. That's the stuff you've probably heard a million times, and I hope I got these numbers right from Edward Stowe's video when it states that something that I've quoted on the channel before, I might have actually been using the wrong information, that the mitochondrial DNA in question could be the same from tens of thousands of people in England at the time. But again, according to the video, I hope I got these numbers right. It's not tens of thousands, it's over 230,000 people may have shared the same mitochondrial DNA in England at the time. So then that hardly would implicate Aaron Kosminski. 230,000 people would be bigger than the population of Whitechapel. Whitechapel had approximately 70,000 people. Next point. The researchers argue that a Kosminski was first identified as a suspect by the London Metropolitan Police, but no first name recorded, is actually Aaron Kosminski, an inmate of Colney Hatch Asylum, despite conflicting biographical records for the two men. Well, of course, this is one thing that even launched into David Cohen becoming a Jack the Ripper suspect, and the Ripperologist Martin Fido was saying that, oh, well, this isn't even referring to Aaron Kosminski, it's actually referring to somebody named Nathan Kaminsky, who's most likely, Nathan was probably not even his real name, but he's recorded in one of the records as being David Cohen, which was just a generic name. And, I mean, honestly, I don't think that David Cohen was Jack the Ripper either, although Martin Fido made a very, very convincing case. When you hear him talk, he just sounds so passionate and so adamant about David Cohen being Jack the Ripper. But, I mean, let's just read the final thing here. Tunnel vision involves a narrow focus on a single theory, such as the exclusive targeting of Aaron Kosminski for the mitochondrial DNA test. Let's just stop right there. This is everything. This is the whole focus of the episode. Well, if you have, let's not even say 230,000, tens of thousands of people in England in 1888 with the same mitochondrial DNA, just to say, yeah, that's Aaron Kosminski. Well, I mean, no, it's not. That's the end of this. Now, when you have these biases, they can lead to a premature shift from an evidence-based investigation to a suspect based on that investigation, Kim Rossmo said. Confirmation bias is a type of selective thinking that becomes a problem. Human inclination is to confirm our theories by seeking out supporting information, interpreting ambiguous information as backing our beliefs, and minimizing inconsistent information. I told you I love Dr. Kim Rossmo's material. That's why, because he can articulate that so incredibly well about all of these reasons that people have for zoning in on a suspect, and they find the evidence that supports their suspect being Jack the Ripper or the Zodiac Killer or D.B. Cooper. But that doesn't really mean anything at all. I mean, was this person actually the killer? And my take on the subject is, I am absolutely not convinced that there was even semen left behind from Jack the Ripper. I mean, you would think that there would be more semen left behind at other crime scenes, particularly after the murder of Mary Kelly, when Jack the Ripper had access to the victim indoors, mind you, for a period of approximately 2 hours. You would think that there would be semen if he is ejaculating after these murders. But with a murder of Catherine Eddowes, let's say even hypothetically, hypothetically the Ripper did get aroused and by his crimes, even though they were not rapes. I mean, we aren't 100% sure that that stain came from the Ripper. We aren't 100% sure that that stain came from Kosminski. But Aaron Kosminski is a fascinating suspect. I have said this once and I'll say it again. He is one of my top suspects. I know I've been critical, but I do think Aaron Kosminski is a strong Jack the Ripper suspect. That doesn't mean for a second that any of these claims about the DNA are accurate. And I've also talked about mitochondrial DNA in the episodes that I've done on Walter Sickert, as well as the book discussion on Portrait of a Killer by Patricia Cornwell, where she is even critical of some of the DNA discussions that she put forward, saying that the DNA matches Walter Sickert, and that was a mitochondrial DNA match from the open shawl letter, which is an unconfirmed Jack the Ripper communication. All the Ripper communications are unconfirmed in my opinion. But I would love to know what you think about the DNA. I would love to know what you think about Aaron Kosminski as a Jack the Ripper suspect. I would love to know what you think about the stories that you heard in that clip from House of Lechmere. I would love to know what you think about the CBS article. I would love to know what you think about the Texas State write-up about Dr. Kim Rossmo and his challenges to this DNA claim. And I would love to know what you think about any of my comments. As you see, I'm taking a very loud stance, but this is what I genuinely believe. I do not think they have Jack the Ripper's DNA, and I also do not think this is the last time we're going to see 7,500 news articles coming out about how there's a DNA breakthrough, even though, number one, the news story is 11 years old. Number two, the book is 11 years old. Number three, this is going to happen again in probably 3 or 4 years at the same magnitude. What do you guys think about anything that has been discussed in this episode? Please put your ideas in the comment section down below. You already know about Black Box Online Radio at AOL.com, Black Box Online Radio on Facebook, blackboxonlineradio on Instagram and TikTok, and that's all for me, and I'll see you over there. Until next time.